Well, welcome to the 700 Club, and thanks for joining with us. Well, churches, mosques, synagogues are bombed. Religious leaders are kidnapped and tortured, and people of faith are harshly persecuted. Russia is carrying out a diabolical plan in Ukraine to cleanse the country of certain religious groups.
Advocates for religious freedom are raising the alarm about the abuses and calling for action to stop them. Wendy Griffith reports.
Russia is under the microscope for atrocities committed since the start of its war with Ukraine, from the killing and torture of religious leaders to the destruction of houses of worship. One Russian official even used the term de-Satanization to describe the plan to cleanse the nation of many religious groups.
De-Satanization should be understood as nothing less than the elimination of Ukraine's flourishing religious diversity.
Wednesday, members of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom met virtually to highlight how Russia's invasion of Ukraine is creating severe violations of religious freedom, especially in Russia's occupied territories.
The Russian military has indiscriminately bombed churches, monasteries, kingdom halls, mosques, synagogues, cemeteries, and other religious sites. And the Russian soldiers have abducted, tortured religious figures because of their leadership role.
At least 8 Russian tanks.
CBN News reported firsthand on the atrocities in the city of Bucha outside Kyiv. Our George Thomas met with Christians who were forced to hide and pray as Russian troops carried out atrocities.
The commander said he would make me watch as he killed the others, and then he would skin me alive.
167 Ukrainian Christians hid in the basement of their church when the Russian assault started. Video and pictures obtained by CBN News show church members praying, singing, and reading scriptures day and night. Anahan believes God spared their lives because of their prayers.
It was very clear to us that God was watching over us. Everything was in his hands. Like the story of how Daniel was in the lion's den, we were under God's protection.
Ukrainians' Jewish community is also targeted.
Russian forces attacking Ukraine have also physically desecrated Holocaust remembrance sites and sadly killed Holocaust survivors.
It's not just Ukraine. Since the invasion, Moscow is tightening its grip inside Russia, including religious groups. Moscow's exiled chief rabbi testified about the ongoing anti-Semitism faced by Jews there.
The new situation for Jews in Russia is becoming more and more dangerous. And in September, I called on the Jews of Russia, whoever can leave should leave the country.
Rabbi Goldschmidt says 30% of Russian Jews have fled Russia since the war began, with some 50,000 emigrating to Israel. CBN News recently accompanied a plane load of Ukrainian and Jewish refugees making Aliyah to Israel with the help of the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. Former Congressman Frank Wolf recommended sending a delegation to Moscow, including the Pope, to press Russian political and religious leaders to stop the persecution. Wendy Griffith, CBN News.
Well, this is yet more evidence of war crimes being committed by Russia in Ukraine and the horrific stories of what Russian soldiers are doing to the women there. The bombing of hospitals and schools, the targeting of infrastructure, whether that's the electrical grid or how people get food or transportation, targeting the civilian population. All of these things add up to one word: evil. This is evil. And when you look at what the Russian Orthodox Church has done, where they've endorsed the war, and they have said this is a good war, and all of these things happening, you really shake your head. What in the world are you doing? What are you trying to enforce here? And this whole dream of some greater Russia that includes all of Ukraine, well, if you're going to completely kill the people, what are you trying to do? It's time for the world community to really stand up to this and say, okay, we're going to hold you responsible for these war crimes. This should never happen again. Jews should never be targeted. People should never be targeted for their religious faith, but that's what's happening, and it's happening right now in Ukraine. In other news, despite some good news out of Europe, analysts are still predicting, that's for Credit Suisse, that bank, they're rescuing it. They're still predicting a rough ride ahead for our banking system. John Jessup has more on that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. John?
That is right, Gordon. Stock in the Swiss bank Credit Suisse soaring more than 30% on news that it's getting an injection of nearly $54 billion. Switzerland's central bank stepped in with the loan to shore up the bank's finances. That's a major swing after shares of Credit Suisse plunged 30% the day before after its biggest shareholder said it would not kick in more money. That sparked fears of a downturn in the European banking system that could have spread to the United States. The head of Wall Street's biggest investment banking firm, BlackRock, however, predicts more bank seizures and shutdowns are possible in the days ahead, saying this could be a slow-rolling crisis. Well, a federal judge pressed both sides of the debate in a hearing questioning FDA approval of an abortion drug. The Alliance Defending Freedom argues the drug mifepristone is unsafe and did not undergo proper vetting. In a 4-hour hearing Wednesday, Judge Matthew Kaczmarek questioned whether the process to approve the drug rose to federal standards needed for approval. He also questioned whether a judge has the authority to withdraw that approval. Kaczmarek, a Christian known for his pro-life views, did not indicate how he might rule, but he did say he would make a decision as soon as possible. The House Homeland Security Committee kicked off hearings into Biden administration policies from the border town of McAllen, Texas. They say it's to get a first-hand look at the crisis on the southern border. Democrats on the committee chose to stay home, calling the move a political stunt. CBN's Caitlin Burke reports.
Chairman Mark Green defended his decision to hold Wednesday's hearing in Texas, saying it's important for lawmakers to get a first-hand look at what's going on if they're going to make informed decisions going forward. He also had some harsh words for his absent committee members.
You can't have bipartisanship if the other side fails to show up for their duty. And in the Army, when someone didn't show up, we called them AWOL, or absent without leave. Their place of duty is at this hearing because it's a full hearing, and they're not here. They're AWOL.
This hearing focusing on changes the Biden administration made to U.S. immigration policies when it took over.
Chief, in fiscal year 2020, the policy was detain and remove. The entire objective was to avoid releasing any illegal immigrant for any reason. In 2021, Secretary Mayorkas, the new administration, gutted all of those policies. Do you acknowledge, as the chief of the Border Patrol, that the driver of the crisis that you have described, of this dramatic change in flow, the policy is the policy of this administration to release instead of detain or remove illegal immigrants?
Law enforcement's pretty simple, sir. You have to have capacity and you have to have consequences. And anytime you don't have consequences, you're certainly going to see some increases.
Border Patrol Chief Raul Ortiz admits DHS doesn't have operational control, pointing to 5 sectors along the border that aren't secure. Sheriff Brad Coe of Kenny County, Texas, says his jurisdiction is under siege due to the amount of border crossings by illegal immigrants and smugglers.
We're averaging between 160 and 180 people per night that are going through the county unchallenged. That comes out to roughly 60,000 people enter through my county this year.
Lawmakers also focusing on how Mexican cartels are using the chaotic border situation to flood the U.S. with drugs like fentanyl.
Fentanyl-involved deaths has increased by over 230% since Biden has taken office. In my district alone, we have had fentanyl-involved deaths increase by over 350%.
Assistant Director for Homeland Security Investigations, Stephen Kagan, told lawmakers his teams have found that China is the source of the fentanyl supply chain, producing the chemicals needed to make the drug and shipping them to Mexican labs.
We've seized, I believe it's a little bit over 3.3 million pounds of precursor chemicals coming from China, entering into Mexico.
Republicans say testimony like what they heard on Wednesday will not only help shape future legislation, but will also help hold the Biden administration accountable. Caitlin Burke, CBN News, Washington.
Thank you, Caitlin. Gordon, back to you.
Well, it seems clear the administration doesn't want to enforce the current law, and the whole let's release into the United States is a dramatic policy change, and that is a policy change that's been heard around the world. And so now you have, not just dozens, but over 70 countries where people are leaving and coming because they heard the word the border was open. that even if they get caught, they're going to be processed and then released into the United States. So that message is going around the world. And if you're not going to enforce the law, then, you know, I've got to ask, why? What is your end game here? Because the end game for the United States is 3 million people a year who don't have jobs and don't have a visible means of support. So that means they're going to be flooding into our already overloaded cities, trying to find the American dream, and it's just absolutely crazy. I don't understand it, but we've been reporting on this now for some time, raising the flag. This is a real problem. This is a crisis on our southern border. Every single one of the law enforcement personnel on the border says this is a problem. We're creating things that we literally can't solve. And if we just would enforce the law and not either detain or remove, well, then you can stop the flow. But if they're not going to enforce it, I just shake my head. Why did you take an oath in office? What are you really trying to do? And I still can't figure out what's their end game here. What's the possible benefit either to them politically or to the country from allowing this policy to go? It literally makes no sense.